it is such an honor to welcome the 2020 winner of the Prix Goncourt. And as you well know from the way I say anything, that I do not pronounce things well in French, and sadly, sometimes not too well in English as well. I would love to mention the book has been a runaway bestseller in France, where it won the Prix Goncourt last year. The New York Times had a spectacular review for this book. Actually, it got rave reviews everywhere. The Anomaly lies in that exciting Venn diagram where high entertainment meets serious literature. Its plot might have been borrowed from The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror, but it movingly explores urgent questions about reality, fate, and free will. If our lives might not be our own and we end up dying either way, how should we live? And to be specific, it is the best-selling Prix Goncourt winner since 1984's The Lover. Herve Le Tellier is a writer, journalist, mathematician, food critic, and teacher. He's been a member of Aleppo Group since 1991 and one of the papoose of the famous French culture radio show. He's published numerous books of stories, essays, memoir, and novels, including The Anomaly, which has sold more than 1 million copies worldwide, as well as All Happy Families, Electric OW, and Enough About Love. Joining us from Paris, he's going to say, do a short introduction and a short reading in English, as this is an Alliance Française event. We will also have a little French interlude where he will read in French and then have a short conversation with Anne in French as well. So greetings, welcome to the United States, welcome to the world of Lawrence University, close by. But thank you for coming.
Hello. Well, I'll begin with the beginning of the book, which is a good idea for a beginning. So the beginning of the book is called Blake, and it begins like what we should call a black novel. And you will also forgive my English, which is sometimes approximative. Killing someone doesn't mean a thing. Gotta watch, monitor, think a lot, and come the time, carve into the void. That's it. Carve into the void. Find a way to make the universe shrink, to make it shrink till it's condensed into the barrel of the gun or to the point of the knife. That's all. Don't ask any questions. Don't be driven by anger. Choose the protocol and proceed methodically. Blake does do all that, and he's been doing it for so long that he can't remember when he started. Once you have it, the rest just falls in place. Blake builds his life on other people's death. No moralizing, please. If anyone wants to talk ethics, he's happy to reply with statistics because, and Blake apologizes, when a health minister made cuts in the budget, cutting a scan of air, a doctor here, and a resus room somewhere else, that minister knows that he or she is appreciably shortening the lives of thousands of strangers. Responsible but not answerable. We've all heard that tune. With Blake, it's the other way around. And anyway, he doesn't need to justify himself. He just couldn't give a damn. Killing isn't a vocation, it's a learning, a state of mind, if that makes more sense. Blake is 11 years old and his name isn't Blake. He's in the Peugeot with his mother on a minor near Bordeaux. They're not traveling especially fast. A dog crosses the road. The impact barely alters their course. Sorry. His mother screams, brakes too hard. The car zigzags and the engine stalls. Stay in the car, honey. My God, you be sure to stay in the car. Blake doesn't do as he's told. He follows his mother. It's a grey collie. The collision has crushed his chest. Blood is oozing onto the verge. But the dog isn't dead. It whimpers, sounding like a baby mooling. Blake's mother runs in every direction, panicking. She covers Blake's eyes with her hand, stammers incoherently. She wants to call an ambulance, but ma'am, it's only a mutt. The car putters on the facet's asphalt. Its broken, twisted body contorts at a strange angle, racked with gradually diminishing twitches, dying right in front of Blake's eyes. And Blake watches inquisitively as the life drains out of the animal. It's over. The boy puts on a cursory show of sadness, well, what he imagines sadness is, to avoid disconcerting his mother, but he feels nothing. His mother stays by the little body, frozen but to the spot. Blake's had enough. He pulls at her sleeve. Come on, Mom. There's no point staying here. He's dead. Let's go. I'm going to be late for the game. So that's the beginning. And as you see, it's the beginning of the game is in the genre of a black novel, but it's only for this genre for, let us say, 10 pages. And then it changes genre. It goes to an intimate novel, and then it goes to a sentimental novel, then to a science fiction novel. It changes every chapter changes.
So I had read somewhere that you had structured the book such that every character had their own genre. So that was on purpose then. Yes,
it's on purpose because, and it's sort of an easy way to do the book. I shouldn't say it's more difficult. In fact, it's easier because when you are stuck to a character, you have to have a genre which is built on his character. You cannot make Proust, on a killer. You cannot write Flaubert, you have to choose a genre which is connected directly to the character. And it's easier to do it this way because every time the reader goes back to this character, he recognizes the genre. But I didn't go into what I could call an experimental novel, which means that the genres are unified, are fluidified in something which is a real unity novel. There is no hard jump from one chapter to the other one. It is still recognizable as my type of writing, but still I'm going into genre that I like introspection, like a war part of the novel. And so the idea of connecting a genre to a character is in fact easier.
It's surprising that I don't think I'd ever really read a book like that before. So it might have been easier for you, but I'm sure it led to some struggles. I'd love for you to talk about the origins for the book, like what made you write this book.
Yeah, we had a very short discussion before this interview, which was how not to spoil. And it's a good question, how not to spoil. Well, the general idea was, I was in 2018 and it was in summer, and I was wanting to write a short novel about someone who is coming home and meeting himself. I mean, he opens the door and someone is already in his home and it's him. So the idea was, how would I behave myself if I was confronted to myself? And it was a very weak idea for a short novel. I mean, I was not going anywhere. And then I realized that it would be much more interesting if I took this situation, which is how would everybody react confronted to himself, and try to analyze all the possible reactions to this situation. And of course, me, for example, I wouldn't kill myself. I am incapable of killing myself. And I hope anyone. But some people are able to do that. And I wouldn't be able either to sacrifice myself, I mean, to come into my home and to see someone at home with my wife, my children, and I have only one child, but still, and say, okay, I'll leave you my life and I'm going away. So from these two extreme situations, which is sacrifice and killing the other one, there are quite an amount of possibilities. And I listed all the possibilities that would be situations that people would be put in if they were confronted to themselves. And from these situations, which is not a real natural way of writing, I built a character. I built a character who would be able to react to such a situation. And building this character is not a normal situation for writing, because usually what you do when you write a book is you have a character and you throw him in many situations. In my case, I had just one situation, being confronted yourself. And how many reactions are possible? What is the spectrum of reaction? And I looked at the spectrum, I identified something like 16 possible reactions, and I selected 8. And I made some kind of a casting for these situations, which means, okay, who is going to sacrifice himself? Is he going to be a man, a woman? Is he going to be young? Is he going to be old? And to sacrifice yourself, you don't have to be too old, because too many things are built. And so I finally decided that I would choose a young woman who's in love with a man, but of course she's confronted to another woman who is also in love with the same man, of course, because she's confronted to herself. And this woman would be in a certain situation that would strongly advise her to sacrifice herself, and so on. To build a character who was going to kill the other one, you have to be a professional. So I built a character who is a professional killer, and so on. So finally, I had something like 8 characters who would be in a situation of being confronted to themselves. And plus, I built other characters which appear after that, which gave me the possibility of going into genre that I wanted to have, like, for example, the British comedy, you know, with Hugh Grant and Andrew McDowell. This kind of idea that I had of movies which I wanted to put into a book. And so altogether, I think the number of characters are something like 11, not counting the second characters, but 11 characters that you follow all around the book. And that was a very stimulating way of writing for me, because I had no difficulties with genre. I am an old writer. I've been writing novels in many types of genre. So I was using this experience to do something new for me, and to also build something which would be an experiment for the reader, which would be something new. Of course, I didn't expect to be a success. It has been a tremendous success in France, but it was not supposed to be. I had the idea of making some kind of book which would be a page turner. That is true. And I used the what we call the topos and the tricks of page turners, like having something at the end of each chapter which pushes you to know what's going to happen afterwards, and which was sometimes even what I could say not only symbolic but even cliche. But it didn't matter for me. I mean, I'm okay with cliches. I have nothing against it. I have a lot against literary cliche, but I have nothing against scenaristic cliches, because sometimes everything is a scenaristic cliche. If you take any type of person, he will be in a cliche somewhere. Every character has already been written. The more you read, the more you see that everything has been done. So it doesn't matter. You can do it again. Do it new, that's all. And so having a depressive, for example, having a depressive writer inside the book is, of course, a cliche, but having a not depressive and very arrogant writer is also a cliche. So it's okay. Any writer is a cliche. They all exist. They all exist. So I choose a depressive one, and it's okay. And so altogether, I had my 11 characters, and I followed them, and it was really fun.
Anne, would you like to ask I want to make sure, Anne, you ask a question.
Yeah, no, so I just wanted, you are part of the group Oulipo,
Yeah.
and Oulipo wants to create literature under a constraint to sort of create something new.
Yes.
What is the constraint, or is there a constraint in L'Anomaly that you used?
Yeah, well, the general idea of Oulipo is really to build with structures and constraints. One of the examples, which is the most obvious, is the constraints that uses Georges Perec sometimes, who's like writing a book without the letter E. And it's called La Disparition, the avoid in English. It's been translated by, I think, Gilbert Adair. And this translation is extraordinary because when you translate the book, you translate the constraint. And I think it's even more difficult to translate the book with constraint than writing the book with constraint, because you have to follow the constraint plus the story of the book. So it's difficult. But in this book, in The Anomaly, the constraints are, first, I made them disappear. I mean, it's like a patchwork, a costume of Harlequin. And when you make a costume of Harlequin, all the thing is taking the threads away so that nobody sees how it's built. So that's what I did. I have a cahier des charges. I don't know how to translate cahier des charges, but I had a way of building it, which was following a thread and many threads, colored threads. For me, it was colored threads. For example, there is a black string, which is Blake, which I just began with. And I have a white string, which is more fluid, more going around, which is Victor Miesel, who is the writer. But after that, every character is linked to a thread. And I follow these threads in the first part of the book. There's three parts in the book. And really, the first part is very built in the constraints, following these threads, each of them, and building what I called a Scooby-Doo, which is a necklace for little boys and little girls, where you have many strings of color. So the idea of having strings of color to follow the characters was important. And after that, there is what we call intertextuality. But I made it disappear. For example, there are some extracts from many writers, but I changed all the quotes were changed, or they were altered, or they were introduced in another way. For example, there's this sentence of the beginning of Anna Karenine, which is all happy families are alike, all unhappy families are different. I don't know the exact translation in English. And I used it in another way, saying that all flights with no turbulence are alike. Every flight with turbulence is different. So some of them are very easily recognizable, and others, like quotes from Nietzsche or quotes from Kafka or quotes from Faulkner, I'm sure that nobody will see them. I'm the only one who knows where they are, because they have been so much altered. There's one, for example, by Sénèque, who said, Sénèque, I don't know the name in English. Sénèque, Cynic, who cares? Latin writer.
Seneca.
Oh,
Seneca.
Seneca.
Yeah.
Seneca, which is every tired person is irritable, and I changed it. I changed it in something else. So intertextuality is inside the book, and that's one of the constraints. And another constraint is changing beginning of chapters using other books, which I love. And there was so much change that it wasn't very not recognizable. Sometimes using constraint is a tool, sometimes it's a principle. For me, it's a principle, it's not a tool. It doesn't make you go faster, even it slows you to use constraints. But at the same time, it avoids the blank page syndrome, which is sometimes stopping a writer from writing. So you have no white page. You can begin and it's okay, and otherwise you can change afterwards.
Go ahead.
So we have a question. At a certain point, you mentioned that General Silveria, who's a minor character in the book, that he wanted to go to Lawrence University. And of course, that just piqued us because Lawrence is right next door to Milwaukee. So what is
Yes,
that?
well, you know, when you build a character, you make his biography. And I had a biography for Silveria, like I had a biography for every character. And I decided that he would come from Wisconsin. And finally, I didn't use it so much because, as you see, he has a different accent because he moved later, but nobody knows that. So I didn't want him to want to go to a very famous university, which is, you know, the only one we know in France. It's like, you know, Berkeley or Columbia, which are close to us. And I wanted him to go to a normal university, and Lawrence University was perfect for me. So I picked up many universities possible for me, and I picked up Lawrence. He has a story, Silveria, that I didn't use. Many characters I used 1/10 of the biography I had, and it's okay for me to use at the same time many informations I have disponible that I can use and not use all of them. But you know, sometimes the characters are not very much described physically. He can have a limp. I had a character who had a limp, but I made this thing disappear. I didn't use it at the end because I wanted to shorten the book. But it's very important to have a general idea of the characters. Sometimes even know when their birthday is, even if you don't use it. And yeah. I had birthdays for all my characters.
Oh, you know, it's interesting. I don't know how many, I've heard writers talk about building backstory, but I'm not sure everybody goes to the extent you do. I mean, I had thought after I finished this book, is like any one of these characters could have been the protagonist in a book. And now I know why, because you just built their lives into it. So it's one of the things that's so enjoyable about reading the story. I would say the only thing that's tough for me is that by starting with Blake, some people misconstrue the book as a thriller but he's also such a strong character that I feel like it's hard for him, like you have to hold him back from taking over the story just because he's so compelling.
Yeah, exactly. And to go further, I have an editor friend who said, please write me a Blake, you know, write me a Blake story. You know, this book has been very read by many people, and many people want to know the story of Blake. And I reduced Blake. He's only present for 40 pages to 30 pages. As every other character, they are between, let us say, 20 or 40 pages altogether. None of them goes further than that. But all of them could be a book. And I decided that it would be an experimental book in the fact that I wouldn't finish the stories. The book finishes in a way that there is a frustration. And this is on purpose. I mean, this is why I was surprised by the success of the book, because sometimes it's a frustrating book because it doesn't go to the end of all the stories. But the point is that every novel has to be a frustrating book, because you have to be enough into the characters and enough into the stories that you shouldn't want a book to finish. It's a good thing that the book finishes in a way that you are unhappy that it finishes. So the story of Blake, in fact, you're right, he was being able to take over the story, but the idea of the simulation could also take over the story, and I decided not to take over the story. I wanted to concentrate on the characters and not on the hypothesis, which was also an interesting hypothesis. I didn't want it to take over the book. I don't throw away the term of science fiction book, because in some way, every experiment of thought is a science fiction experiment. And there is science and there is fiction in this book. So science fiction is okay for me, even if I don't classify it in my head like this. But when some people who like science fiction said it was science fiction, I said, okay. But the general idea was that simulation was strong. Yeah. The idea is very strong. So it doesn't take over the book.
No, I think some people might say it's science fiction because the bones of the book, like that the characters live in, is a science fiction construct. And you yourself have talked a number of times about how much you have loved science fiction,
Yes, I did.
especially growing up. One of the things I noticed, though, the profile of you listed Isaac Asimov, what was it, Frederick?
K. Dick.
Yeah, and then they said Daniel Keyes, and I asked my science fiction reader, I'm like, Daniel Keyes, do you think Daniel Keyes is science fiction? He said no. And then in All Happy Families, you didn't say Daniel Keyes, you said Simak, Clifford Simak. So he thought that was a much better.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's Daniel Keyes is Flowers for Algernon.
Yeah.
Of course, and it's not a science fiction book. It's an experiment of thought for a child, of course. But at the same time, it's not something that has happened. It's just also science fiction. I mean,
True enough.
You know, so and I read it in a collection, which was a collection of science fiction. Yeah. So I associated it in France to science fiction, but of course it is not. It is an experiment of thought, and it's an extraordinary book when you read it when you are young, because it's not only about it's also something about illness, and so it's a book about getting old and about the loss of the capacities you have, intellectual capacities. And it's something that all of us are afraid of. It's a terror. It's a book about terror, really. And that's why I mentioned it as a very, it was a foundation book for me, really. I love this book. I read it when I was 12 or 13. And it's really a book that I haven't read again because of the impression I had when I read it, and I don't want to spoil it again. I was too young to understand all of it, but still I don't want to read it again.
How has your background in mathematics and obviously science influenced your writing?
It's hard to say, because there's no way that number theory can influence a book enormously. Especially a fiction book, but I'm very logical, and I still have this logic when I build a book. I want all the doors opened to be closed, and in the construction, I'm trying to be as exhaustive as I can. But it's hard to say. For example, you mentioned Oulipo, and Oulipo is a group that gathers not only writers, but also mathematicians and also linguists. And the mathematicians inside the group, what they do is they bring structures, they bring ideas to build books. For example, I built a book which is called Enough About Love, and I built it with a domino game. A domino, yes? You say domino, with a domino game. And Perec built a book with a chessboard. And usually we use this type of games to build structures, because they are very, there's a lot of fecundity, a lot of creativity coming from using an existing structure to build a book. In being a mathematician isn't really helping, but it's part of me. And it's hard for me not to mention science sometimes in books. I've always been interested in also evolution. I've been working in a multidisciplinary team about the growth of species on an island, which was 40 years ago. So it's very, I've been doing as a mathematician very strange things, and sometimes they still have an influence on me.
I would just like to note that as a person who loves number theory so much, I can see
Fibonacci.
Oh, yes, amazing primes and twin primes and number. I did my high school thesis paper on pentagonal numbers. Oh, a dream. But I can see how that connects to wanting. I'm fascinated. I love structure in novels. I love it. I love when it's plotted out and you can see the very particular and unique bones of a story. And that's one of the things that I really love about this book. And it makes me want to read more of your books to see more structures. I had mentioned that I had read your memoir, which followed, not a memoir, childhood story. But you know, I'm fascinated to see more of how you did this. We had somebody who wanted to highlight your translator, Adriana Hunter, who actually also did the previous book I read. Could you talk about, you know, there's definitely a strong move to more represent translators. We're not always successful, but we try when we can because the publishers don't always highlight the translators. But I certainly think about the translator when I read a book in translation. What kind of relationship do you have with your translator? And being someone who is fluent in both languages, did you have any critique, or did you tweak anything, or what did you like, what did you dislike about the translation process?
Yes. When I write a book, like every writer, I don't think about the translator. After that, we discover, when we discuss with the translators, how difficult it is to translate something which are really French. Adriana Hunter is English, and she's a wonderful translator. I think she translated 6 of my books in English. I'm not sure about the number, but she's a wonderful translator. I met her a few number of times. When we worked on the Anomaly, there was many translations going on all together. So I decided with Adriana, with my German translator and my Greek translator and other translators, Spanish, there were also altogether there were 40 translations, which is a lot. And we decided to make an electronic document available for everybody, so that nobody would have to reinvent the wheel, confronted to a situation. But when somebody was stopped somewhere in the book, they would be able to discuss all together of the possibility of translating in some language or another. Because when it's difficult for an English woman, it's difficult for a Greek man who is translating at the same moment, same place. They encounter the same difficulty. So with Adriana and Vasilis and Achilles Kyriakidis and others, we made this electronic document where they also, on a reverse point of view, showed me errors which were inside the book. Because the best reader of a book is, of course, the translator, because he sees things that you don't have realized, and you make mistakes, and they help you to correct. And I remember that I made a mistake in, for example, the slogan of US Air Force. I wrote something wrong, which is Semper Fi, and Semper Fi is Marines. And it's because I changed at the moment Marines by US Air Force, so it changed, and I forgot. And of course, it's Mors Abalto, also Latin, so I changed it. And it's many cases like this where you notice that you made mistakes, and they are very attentive to it because they know that their reader will think it's their fault, but it's not their fault, it's the fault of the writer. So they are asking, and the relationship with a translator is always very, very interesting, because you don't know how much French you write, and you don't know how much German you write, or you are so much stuck into your language that sometimes you don't realize that you are stuck inside it, and you making difficulties for the translator to reproduce what you write, to translate it effectively, because sometimes it's a joke in French, but it has no meaning in English at all, no meaning at all. And one of the books was translated by Adriana Hunter. The name is French, is Je m'attache très facilement. which is I get attached very easily. And it's a double meaning in France. It means to fall in love very easily, to get attached, to fall in love very easily. But it's also meaning to put your seatbelt, to put your belt inside a car, you know, s'attacher, to get attached. So how to translate both of the meanings? You can't. So you have to choose to lose one of them. So finally, the title is totally different in English, and it's very logical. So working with a translator is really, really interesting, always. And really, they are our best readers.
Very cool.
And do you think maybe this is the time to read a little in French?
Yeah. Donc, je vois sur la liste qu'il y a pas mal de membres de l'Alliance qui font partie de ce groupe. Et on se demandait si vous pouvez lire un passage en français.
Absolument. Et ça commence de manière assez coordonnée avec le fait que je viens de boire. Donc, c'est le passage qui est le début c'est le premier paragraphe de David.
Merci.
Le ficus a soif. Ses feuilles brunes s'enroulent dans leur sécheresse. Des branches sont déjà mortes. Il incarne dans son pot de plastique la désolation même, si tant est que le verbe incarner convienne à une plante verte. Si on ne l'arrose pas bientôt, se dit David, il va mourir. En toute logique, on doit pouvoir trouver quelque part sur la ligne continue du temps un point de non-retour, un moment de basculement irrémédiable à partir duquel plus rien ni personne ne saura sauver le ficus. Jeudi à 17h35, quelqu'un l'arrosera et l'arbre survivra. Jeudi à 17h36, n'importe qui se pointera avec une bouteille d'eau et ce sera « Non, mon chou, c'est gentil, il y a 30 secondes, je ne dis pas, peut-être, mais là, qu'est-ce que tu crois ?» La seule cellule qui pouvait relancer la machine, l'utile vaillante eucaryote qui aurait pu réveiller ses voisines, leur crier « Allez les filles, on se remotive, on réagit, on se regonfle, on ne se laisse pas aller. » Eh bien, la dernière des dernières vient de nous quitter. Alors tu arrives trop tard avec ta minable petite bouteille. Ciao, ciao. Oui, quelque part sur la ligne du temps. And if I may say, this is interesting because what I just have read is this kind of difficulty we have in French and English, because it's about cells. The story is about cells who are inside a plant, and there is a moment where the plant will die if no water is brought to the cells. And there is another moment where the plant will survive because water has been brought to the cells. Cells in French is cellule. It's feminine. It's feminine. So when you write this paragraph, when the cell says to the other cells around her, around it, what to do, and she says "Allez les filles," which means "Come on, girls, let us mobilize, let us do something." It's very complicated to translate this in English, because the feminine word of cell brings an idea of a feminine team of volleyball, a feminine team of basketball, and they are all mobilized to save the plant. And this idea, which is brought by the fact that we have genders for words like cells, like une table, une chaise, a table, a chair, brings a general idea in a writer, which is, it's a feminine team, okay, but how do you translate it in English? It's very difficult because, as Adriana said, we can't translate it like this. It doesn't really work. Why should it be a feminine team? It's a team. It's interesting because in our idea, the feminine words bring colors to the world. For example, in French, we say, there's this song of Trenet, you know, Charles Trenet, which says, le soleil a rendez-vous avec la lune. The sun has a meeting with the moon. The sun is masculine in French. The moon is feminine. So it's a guy who has an appointment with a woman. If you translate it in German, it's die Sonne hat einen Treffpunkt mit der Mond. And die Sonne, the sun is masculine, and in this case, the moon is the sun is feminine and the moon is masculine. So it's a completely different story. So when you make, when you have an imagination running around something which is very linked to the language, you bring the translator to a dead end and to a very great difficulty of translation. And in this paragraph, this is what is happening. So it's interesting to always discuss with a translator afterwards, because it's too late. The book is written in French, but it's a situation which is always interesting to examine together.
You had reminded me of a book I really loved that came out last year called Swimming Back to Trout River. It's written by a Chinese-Canadian writer, Linda Wei-Fang, and she has a chapter about concepts in Chinese that don't translate into English. And so I looked actually on a French website to say, did that book get translated? Can I recommend it in French? But it hasn't been translated. So I was like, that would be like a book written in French about concepts that don't translate from French to English, from Chinese to English. That's anyway. Do you feel like I think you've already answered that question. Like your background as a linguist, how is that? It clearly has affected your writing because you're thinking about these sort of things all the time.
Yeah, I have been making linguistics because I was always thinking about these things. It's not because I'm a linguist thinking about it. It's the opposite. It's I was so much thinking about, I was so much thinking about this, but I made linguistics, and of course it's coloring my book. There's also this idea, which is the idea of Benjamin, which is in translation. You never have to think about what the writer is writing. You have to think about what he wants to write, which is different because you can never reach the exact point in any language of what you want to write. This is an important idea because, of course, you write a sentence and at the end, the sentence is what you want to write, but it's not. The sentence is trying to reach the thing that you want to write. And you have to abandon a part of the meaning you wanted to write because otherwise the sentence will be too long or too complicated. So you are satisfied with the sentence, but the sentence is not the point you were aiming to. The point you were aiming to is a bit after the sentence. And the translator has to have this viewing point and not the sentence you have been writing. It's a triangle. The triangle which is built by your sentence, the aim, the point you were aiming to, and we have a translation. And it's a very interesting point of view. So as a linguist, yes, I always think about that. As what is the language? I'm always surprised of what means expressions we have forgotten what they mean. And when we read it, sometimes we forget the original meaning. And it's always strange that children don't understand it because the meaning has disappeared. It's so far away in our history. It comes from Middle Age and everything has changed. I mean, even if you look at the sentences like the sun rises, no, the sun doesn't rise. It's the earth that turns. But we still live in a world where there's no, it's earth-centric, So we still have things like things are rising like the sun, or things are going down, but they're not going down. It's just are turning. But the language is lying. It's always lying because we have an idea which comes from the from ages, and it's still coloring and altering the signification and the meaning of life.
I just want to note that we did an event with an author who wrote about the flat Earth movement and how it's exploded, and so I guess for them it literally does rise. But I think apparently it's one of the conspiracy theories that the internet has just given new life to.
Yeah, it's incredible that this theory, who has been abandoned for ages, even the Greeks, even the Egyptians, the Mesopotamian, knew that the Earth was round. It's incredible that it's coming again, especially with, air travel and planes. And I don't know why, if they really believe in it, why don't they hire a boat to go to the edge of the Earth? It's quite a nice place to visit, have this cliff where all the wall is falling. It would be such a nice place to go, make pictures and selfies. I don't know why they don't do it.
Actually, one of the big proponents actually died in a homemade rocket.
Yeah, but it was horrible. But it was horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, he went, I don't know, 100 meters high and he died. It's horrible.
I love that you know this.
Well,
hey, we have a few questions. A couple of people have asked multiple questions. I'm just going to mention Karen's. All fiction writers, when you ask them about their characters, they say, none of these characters are me. And then when you prod a little, they're like, well, they're all sort of me. But obviously you did have a writer, Victor, that you sort of was the inspiration point for the book, sort of, as the first character. How close, Karen asked, is this character, how close is it to you? And of course there are two of him. And his
there's three of him. There's three of him.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
No, there's two of him, but you are right. There's two of him objectively, but there are three of him.
Yeah. Talk a little about Victor.
Well, Victor Mizel is not me. He's a mixer. He's a cocktail of four French writers, which are, maybe you know one of them, who is Edouard Levé, who has been translated in English, I think. Autoportrait has been translated, and maybe Suicide has been translated also.
Oh wait, did you say Antoine Lorraine?
Edouard Levé.
Oh, Edouard
Levé. Edouard Levé. And a translator, a friend of mine, who is Bernard Höfner, who is a very good translator, and two friends who are alive, because these two are dead. So I mixed all of them, and I made this character, Victor Mizel. And in fact, the most, if a character is close to me, it would be André, who is the architect, who is 60 years old and in love with a young woman, and she's not in love with him anymore. And he has a way of looking at himself, which is very cruel and very objective. And this character would be much closer to me, much closer. And in fact, the first chapter I wrote was not the first chapter of the book, but was the chapter about André and his love story with Lucy, which was more inspiring to me. So I first built this chapter, and I divided it in two, which was Lucy and André, to make two chapters different. But this character is much closer. But this has a meaning and not a meaning at the same time. Every writer can put himself inside a character. It's very easy because at a certain time you have some type of appropriation of a character. But at the same time, you have to be a young girl of 6. You have to write this book. You have to try to interview many people to know how things are. And for example, I have a friend who is a black coming from Ivory Coast, which is different, but it's close to Nigeria, and who is homosexual, and who is 50 and living in France. Now he's living in Canada, but he was living in France 5 years ago. And we had a lot of discussions about being homosexual in Africa. And it was very difficult for him. So he decided he would go away. So the character of Slim Boy is very close to him. In fact, my friend is also a musician. So some of the characters come from interviews. They are taken from also people I really know, like Johanna, who is this black American lawyer who is very close to a friend of mine who is not a lawyer, but she's exactly this type of girl, and so it's easier at the beginning to write thinking of someone, but at a certain time when you write, the characters get some autonomy. They get away from the idea you have at the beginning and they become something else. something that you haven't expected. And so they get away from the original idea you had to build it, and they get really different from the person you were inspired by. And the Johanna I have in the book is very far away from Chana, who is the girl I was thinking about. And it's the same for all the characters. I had the idea of who they were at the beginning, and after that they became who they really were, because the book was writing himself, and they get this autonomy. You don't know why, but they really exist in your mind, and they are different from what you began at the beginning you thought they were. And it's important that they get this autonomy, because it helps you to write. Otherwise, you are stopped by cliche, really.
I guess one question I had is why does the book take place so much in the United States? It felt like a lot of it was happening in the United States. Why did you choose the US rather than France for much of the?
Because it was a game. It was a game with American. It was a game really with American page turners that I loved when I was young. I was writing the book that I wanted to read when I was 16. So really the Atlantic flight between New York and Paris is not the center of the world anymore. The center of the world is in the Pacific, and it's probably between China and Los Angeles or something like that. Europe is an old continent, but still it was the flight of my youth, you know, the New York, Paris, New York. And it was funny to use this this flight as a place for the anomaly to happen. After that, it was funny to have many things happening in the US, because there is also all this imaginary world of the agencies, the army, and this was much more, I think it's much more organized than in France. So we wouldn't have so much efficiency in France for keeping people secured in a big hangar, big local. It would be impossible. So it has to be there. Plus, I wanted to have many nationalities and to make a planetary book. I really wanted a planetary book. If you look at it, I have 5 places which are important to me that I wanted to describe, even 6. I wanted to have a place of war, which is Afghanistan. I have Iraq, sorry. I wanted a place in China. I wanted something in Mumbai. I wanted something in Lagos. I wanted something in France, and wanted something in the US. So the general idea was showing the world how it was. Nothing in Russia, nothing in South America, but still the idea was going everywhere on the planet to show something of how the world is in 2019 when I wrote the book. Before the confinement, before the lockdown, I was writing this book during all the year of 2019. And I wanted to make it a planetary world with many characters. So the general idea of having many things happening in the US, that was natural for me. It was, I'm a reader of a lot of American writers. I'm a watcher of many films, and many come from Hollywood. So it was easy for me to build this world. It's a world. I mean, it's not only US. For many writers, it's a very big part of the world. So it was natural for me to build this.
So I want to apologize to one question asker who wanted to ask about the ending. We can't go into that, but we can give you ideas if you write to us. I do want to say, we have to go soon, but I was like, has Stephen Colbert commented on his depiction? And when is the series coming out? Because if this isn't adapted to a series, I'll eat my chapeau. I don't believe it. It has to, right?
Yeah,
it's in development.
It probably will be.
Yeah.
We're working on it. And the thing is, the book is not written at all like a series. It really, for many people, they have had always this question, is really a series, American series or French series? No, it's not. It's written like a book, really. And I'm very happy that they think it looks like a series because it's a compliment, because they see the images and they don't see how much is built like a book. No series would be built like this. You can't make an episode on one character, then the second episode and another character, then the third episode and the third character. It's complicated. And you have to mix. When we are doing it now, we are mixing.
You're going to mix them more, yeah.
In a real mixing, it has nothing to do with your original book. So it's very interesting. And Stephen Colbert, first, I like his shows. I watch them. I watch John Oliver also. And I think they are very funny and very efficient. And so I wanted to have something in two talk shows, one in France and one in the US, to show the difference. And also to throw every part of the world inside the book. And every part of the world means throwing TV, throwing internet, throwing WhatsApp, throwing messages, throwing also songs, and throwing poems. And every type of, let's say, situation had to be used inside the book. The book is also an experiment about using everything possible to make a book, like an interview of the FBI, who would make a whole chapter with only interviews, and who would make, there's also an article of the New York Times, because it was funny to write a false article of the New York Times. I've been a writer for Le Monde for 20 years, so you writing an article is easy and it's funny, because you use all the habits of quick writers who are journalists, and it's funny to show what you can do with it.
Out of curiosity, did you because I am seeing more books doing these alternate structures to convey information. Did you read A Visit from the Goon Squad, the Jennifer Egan book? It's got a chapter, and one of the chapters is in PowerPoint.
Oh, that's
you
good.
might want to read it.
Yeah, I will.
It's a spectacular book. I mean, it won one of our major awards. It's so good. But if you like a book in weird structure,
yeah,
I'm going to leave the last question to Anne.
Yeah, I could put clear codes also.
Yeah, I guess my question is: are you working on a book now, and are you willing to talk about it?
Right now, I'm finishing I'm finishing it's a big book. It's nearly 400 little stories, very short stories. And I'm trying to write a book, which is a historical book, but it's very complicated. I don't want to go into it, but it's very complicated because it's the fall of the Roman Empire, and it's rather complicated to write about this period, because it's a very complicated period, especially because my hero is a heroine, and the place of woman in the Roman Empire is a very complicated place. So it's difficult to write, and I'm working on it. But right now, I'm mostly taken in theater. I have a theater play which is going out in 2 weeks about Winston Churchill, and I have another one which is going out in 6 months. So we are working on it right now, because as you may know, I do go in 3 types of writing: short, what we could call short forms, which include novel, poetry, etc. Really plays, because I have many plays going on in theaters, and novels. Novels was never the main thing I was used to do, but apparently it seems to be a right thing to do to have some success. So maybe I will continue in this direction, but still I want to go on these three feet, if I can say: short forms, theater, and novels.
Very cool. Well, we're looking forward to reading them
Thank you.
when they come,
Or seeing them.
or seeing them. Yes.
Yes, when you do a collaboration with the Milwaukee Rep or
Yeah.
Lawrence, you go to Lawrence to do something with their theater company.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And
Merci. This was
Um,
wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you for everyone for coming. We wouldn't have a bookstore or an Alliance without you, and hope to see you at another event. Continued success to you, and thank you for a wonderful program.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Au revoir.
Au revoir.